Welcome to the Living Springs Q&A podcast, where your questions are answered live every week by the pastors of Living Springs. Thanks for tuning in.
Good day, everyone. Welcome to a Q&A podcast, and Doug has rejoined us.
It is good to be back. I had a nasty bug that just kicked my butt.
A double helping of one, or you got two back to back?
Yes, one or the other. I don't know, but whatever it was not fun.
No.
So, but yeah, I spent a lot of time in my comfy chair in my office, sleeping.
All right, so that disproves. Last week I thought you were just avoiding the AER we had, but
I am not. I was not avoiding the AER. In fact, I saw it 2 weeks ago and was like, "Oh, I'd like to respond to that, but I'm not going to work because I'm going to sleep instead."
I was thankful because also seeing what you did, what you had to go through, I was happy you didn't bring that to work. So we can wait for this question all you want.
no problem. In saying that, we do have some AER.
Well, I was going to say, we did tease last week that we're changing our podcast name. So this is one of the last couple weeks that we're going to be the Living Springs Q&A podcast. And we said part of it, the name idea came from Doug. We were going to talk about the idea and the meaning behind it this week. So I thought we'd open up some discussion here. Sort of not to jump over your host role, but do you want to unveil the name, Doug, since it was your idea, and we'll all drum roll here?
How long do I let you do that?
Right in Keelan's ear.
Do you stop before I do it, or do I keep doing it until? Do you keep doing it until?
I did it now.
The name that we settled on is inverted orthodoxy.
Because we're completely heretical, right? So
no, we're still orthodox.
I'm just kidding.
That's why it's inverted orthodoxy. The term came to me one day as I was just thinking about my own faith journey, and I think some of what we share on the podcast and some of what we talk about even in our sermons, and how a lot of my theology has shifted and changed. And there are some things that I think completely differently about that I did growing up, and that what I was taught in the evangelical church that I grew up in, but are still completely orthodox. And I had to wrestle through in some of these areas, coming to the place where I'm like, this is valid. Although it's different than what I was always taught, this is a valid view to hold on this thing. This is a valid view to have of this theological topic, whatever it is, and to realize that the Christian river is wider than the stream we swim in. And so for me, it was really, there was this long journey of coming to the place of giving myself permission to change some of the things I believed, and realizing this may be the backwards of what I thought, but it's still orthodox. It's still okay.
Cool. I think it lends itself to, at least the way I hear it, and maybe people can give us some feedback on it. I also feel like it leaves an action available to it. Like, it's not just thinking, but it leads to the orthopraxy, which we've often talked about. Like, it's not just having the right ideas, but we're wanting to live it out. And for some reason, the idea conveys like emotion to me, like motion of like the process of a journey. And so I think there's a lot to it, and so we have a lot of debates about a lot of things, but when you toss that one forward, it was a pretty quick settling. Like, love that. Let's go with it. Yeah.
So we got a website we're going to be launching.
Yep. And website's built, ready to go. We're just taking some pictures if you hear any clicking behind the screen today.
And we've got social media.
Yep.
Will be under that new name. It'll be shifted. So we don't currently have a podcast social media account.
Yep.
Everything is just done under our church.
Yep.
So if you go on Facebook, Living Springs Airdrie. If you go on Instagram, it's Airdrie Living Springs. Yep. So if you want to, in the next couple of weeks, when we do the official announcement, follow it on social media. You can search up on Instagram or Facebook, Inverted Orthodoxy, and there will be a feed there that we keep updated. And then there will be a rebranding. You don't have to do anything if you subscribe.
Yep.
You'll just notice one day in the few weeks coming that the title of this podcast has changed.
On your audio podcast feeds. Anybody who was looking for us on YouTube, we're also going to have a YouTube channel separately, so you can either follow Living Springs, and we're still going to post there, We still are pastors at Living Springs, but try to also reach a wider audience that way as well.
Well, and I think acknowledge that we have reached a wider
And that's what we
a
talked
wider
about last week.
audience. Yeah, that
Yep.
that we do not do this podcast just for people who are part of Living Springs, right? Remember back when we had 3 listeners?
Yep.
And
Very much so.
yeah,
We had more podcasters on the podcast than we had people listening most weeks.
Yes, yes. And so now we have more people who listen outside our church than inside our church.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Pretty wild. Well, I'm excited for the new launch. But in the meantime, let's do some AER.
Time for accusations, explanations, and recantations.
Perfect. So this questioner asked, I'm curious about Doug's comments regarding, this was a couple of weeks ago, regarding the nepotism conversation on the board. If a couple serves as one voice on the board, wouldn't that be the same for a couple working in the church? And I'm wondering if the answer is no, does that mean Doug and Loralie have never spoken even of ideas for the church at home? I guess I don't understand the way it's laid out with the board and staff.
Okay. So, Loralie and I have talked about the church at home. That does happen on rare occasion. Other than our family, there's probably nothing we talk about more at home. The difference between the board and the staff and the distinction between the two lies in the way our church governance, Living Springs church governance, and I'm only speaking to Living Springs church governance because different churches are structured different ways. Yeah. And based on those church structures, board and staff have different responsibilities and function in different ways. At Living Springs, our board predominantly functions to do in the form of accountability for me and also just a sounding board and providing advice and being advisory. So really it's advisory and accountability. All our board members serve in other areas of ministry in our church and a wide range of areas in our church, but they don't serve in those areas because they're board members. They serve in those areas because that's where they want to serve. Their role as a board is to be advisory and an accountability for me. And so when you think about that advisory board, predominantly what they're doing is I will do up a report before every board meeting and I will submit it to the board and the board sees it and it's got what's been going on and some of the things we're talking about and planning and get their feedback on things. And that's really one of the main functions, probably the main function of the board is to be a sounding board for ideas that we as a staff have or ideas that I have. And so because that is the nature and one of the core functions and probably the biggest purpose of the board, when you have a husband and a wife, that you've actually reduced that sounding board by one seat. Conversely, staff aren't just a sounding board. They're people who are involved in doing ministry and have a vision for different areas of ministry and then want to execute on those things. So there's a very different role and purpose between what the board does and what the staff do. And that's why I think there's a difference between having a husband and wife on staff together and a husband and wife on the board together. Loralie and I are not the first spousal couple that we've had on staff. We, back in the day, had husband and wife kids pastor team, and we also had Johnny and Melissa, who served as a husband and wife couple team on staff. So this is something we've practiced because we recognize as a staff, you're executing ministry. You're doing the work of ministry, or you're doing the work of equipping people for ministry. Those are the two things that you're doing. The purpose of the board is not that. It's not, and again, not that I'm saying the board members don't serve, but where they serve isn't because they're a board member. Right. But that's why I think there is a difference between having a husband and wife on the board and having a husband and wife that could serve together as staff.
Right. Great.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, as you're saying it, what I'd be hearing from that, or what I am hearing from that, right? Your board might at some point have a decision to make and they would vote, and then you'd be only getting one vote from a couple potentially, right?
Probably, in all probability.
2 votes in one position.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd have 2 votes, but yes, it wouldn't reflect 2 different perspectives because oftentimes husbands and wives come to that place of agreement. And we vote on things at every meeting.
Yes. So
not necessarily a formal vote, but at every meeting we have, they're giving yay or nay. They're giving feedback and perspective on things at every meeting.
Mm-hmm. Whereas that's not how we operate as a staff. That is very different. Like sometimes we make decisions together, but very rarely are we voting on something. We're kind of working towards a consensus. So it is a little different to me.
But we also, as a staff, don't all speak into everybody's area of responsibility.
Because we have different roles.
Because, we have different roles. So, like on Wednesday morning, every morning before I leave for work, I typically give Loralie a kiss goodbye, and I say, have a good day at work. I hope your boss is nice to you. And then when she says in response, if he doesn't, I'll talk to my husband about it when I get home. Because when we come here, we really do kind of put our husband-wife hat aside, and she's got her areas of responsibility, and I've got mine. And although she's a part of the team, we're working on different areas of the overall structure.
Mm-hmm.
Just like in a team, you got different people doing different jobs.
Yeah, it's not as conflict of interest as it would be at the board.
It's
all
not
I'm
a
saying.
conflict of interest on the board, and I don't want to present it at that.
True.
It's just, and it's not a hard and fast rule. There's nothing in our bylaws that say you can't have it. It's just always been the consensus of the board as we're evaluating things and as we're looking at nominations that come in. If a husband and wife are both nominated, the board has just always said, let one of them put their name forward, because we want to have a wide, as wide a range of voices coming to the meeting and sharing perspective as we can. We have up to 7 board members. There's been times there's been less than that, but 7 is, we can have up to 7. And so what we want is to have 7 perspectives that come and that share and that bring different thoughts and that bring different angles to things and all that sort of stuff. And so we want to make sure that those 7 perspectives are 7 different perspectives. Yep. And so to try to get, Proverbs talks about there's wisdom in a multitude of counsel, to try and let that counsel of the board be as wide as it can be. Right. We just have not done that.
Perfect. I like it. I was just trying to get as much clear as he could for the person who asked the question as to understanding it. So we're good. All right. Next question. We'll move on. It says, hello. I have just started listening to your podcast and have enjoyed your takes on certain questions, both pastorally and personally. I have a question about transgender and people struggling with their gender. I am wondering what your thoughts are on the impact that gender roles have played on people becoming transgenders, and also how certain genders will assume something from that gender. This can be for both male and female. Been wrestling with my own views, but don't want to be in a bubble where my views are the only thing I hear. Mm-hmm. Good question.
I also like that they said, I like your takes on certain questions.
I would like to just say hello and thank you for starting to listen to the podcast.
Totally.
And yes, if you have views on certain questions, you're with everybody else. So
Totally.
And we've never said you have to agree with us, on everything.
No, I just thought it'd be fun to play on that.
Just don't tell me when you don't agree. It hurts my feelings. But these guys can take it.
Totally. This is a question that's obviously huge in our culture, big within the church at the moment. Speaking of the wider church, just as much as our own church, this is a conversation that is impacting a lot of lives, and a lot of families, a lot of people, individuals, impacting policies we talked about last week. There's a lot in here, and so always with these issues, want to say, one, we are not professionals on this matter. We are not well enough studied to be making such decisions for policy and all that. And at the same time, as we've tried to exemplify with our words, even without having to state it, we care about people. Yeah. All that said, and I hope that comes across, and it's not just said, but also felt, we do all have individual perspective on this stuff. And so I'll jump in first into the hot water of this conversation. That I do have concerns or thoughts or observations around the impact of gender roles playing on people becoming transgender. I've relayed this to a few people. 10, 15 years ago, I feel like the large argument culturally was there's nothing that girls can't do that boys can do. That's a regular thing that was happening, and we've seen that prove itself over and over again historically for decades. I think back to even Britain getting a female prime minister. Like, we've seen, okay, there's a confidence in females being able to do stuff. And so I was going through school. I think of like girls wanting to play on certain sports teams, and even like, well, of course a boy can like pink and a girl can like blue. Those kind of things we're trying to push those gender lines, I felt, in certain conversations then. I feel like the shift that has happened now, again, this is purely anecdotally, and I'm not speaking to an internal sense, but I do feel like culturally we've lost some of that language and that push to instead where somebody identifies with which were 60 years ago traditional gender roles or colors or preferences, that has been assumed then they don't fit into a gender, which is new language. That's hard. The mini-series, the Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling was really insightful of this language bubbling and starting online of gender identity. Where we've lost that idea of those things don't matter and don't dictate whether somebody is manly enough or female enough, and instead gone, if you identify with these more traditionally set roles and preferences, you must be of that gender. And so I do feel like culturally we have shifted our language to assume that more than what we were doing 10, 15 years ago. And so I think it's played a big role now that that's the set of tools we are working with culturally to assume gender. It's almost like a re-solidifying of stereotypical gender roles, as I feel what's happened to allow this conversation to some degree. I'm sure I'll have things to recant next week after that. But
Help me understand what you're saying, because
That's what I was going to say.
the way that you're saying it, you're
Yeah.
saying when you were growing up and
Yep.
you were in high school, you
Yep.
felt like the message was
girls can do anything.
girls
boys
can do anything boys can do.
and vice
You-
versa. Guys can be interested in things that were traditionally female.
Correct.
Yep.
Are you saying that that is no longer the message?
I feel like we were working towards that no longer being towards the message, and I feel like we've taken this weird turn. This turn, I'll clarify that, where instead of associating yourself with things that were historically, I'm not going to say historically long term, in the last 60, 80 years, typically one gender. So let's just pick a really easy one. Liking pink has historically, traditionally been a girl thing for us for the last while. I know at one point it was a boy color. I get within our lifetimes. Pink was a girl's color when I first grew up. And then all of a sudden, while the language is shifting towards boys can like pink too, that's totally fine. Or girls can like blue. And now all of a sudden, I feel like the shift has become, well, if you like pink, maybe you are then not a boy, you're a girl. And so by associating with things that are of a stereotypical gender role, people then have been associating or encouraged towards, or there's, I'm sure, different levels of influence in every single case. Instead, we've gone, oh, I like pink, I must then fit with that traditional gender side.
So is what you're saying
Yep.
that you feel like the rise of transgenderism has almost caused a return to more traditional gender roles?
I do think so.
Do you think so? Are you saying that that's the result of the rise of the transgender movement, or are you saying that those things happen coincidentally?
I think coincidentally, yeah.
Okay.
I think so. And I haven't spent enough time thinking about this exact implication, but I've just noticed a lot of the things of I always felt like I liked these things, so therefore I could associate with such and such a gender, was not language we would have had typically, and it's rooted a lot when that's the kind of language, and I know there's a lot of different ways people get to a point of identifying with. So just speaking specifically to some of the cases, going, I feel as though I identify with those things, therefore maybe I am that gender, that opposite gender, as a result of my affiliation towards stereotypical gender role things and traits.
Okay.
I may have much to recant that as I learn things over the next week.
Well, no, that's really interesting though, because and again, I'm the most naive to this, I think, on our panel here, or of us. I just haven't researched as much as you guys have, but I hear the word like blurring the gender lines, or you hear that phrase,
Yep.
right? Which would make me think back to what you're saying, like in your high school experience, that they were, blending those or saying it doesn't matter whether you like pink, blue, whatever. And that now we'd return to it in a time where it seems like that would be something we'd be wanting to fight against, right?
Right.
But
But it's been a shift in what the blurring is.
Yeah.
yeah,
Is I guess what Kyle
Yeah.
is saying. There's been a shift from blurring of the gender lines from the roles that those genders would be to the identification of what somebody would be. Is that an
I
accurate
think,
representation of what
that's
you're
a
saying?
simplification. Yeah.
The blurring of lines has shifted.
Yep.
yeah, and that's a good way of saying that, Doug. I was thinking a little bit different on the question and how it was asked. Just thinking of, even as we're calling our new, or we relaunch inverted orthodoxy, I was like, if you had come at me with this question 20 years ago, probably even 10 years ago, I would say, yeah, like, you know, if males would stand up in their homes and do male things, you know, and if females would do female things, we wouldn't have any trouble.
Right.
That has changed in me drastically.
Right.
Being married and to a really good wife has probably changed that drastically for me. Whereas I just don't see that. I don't know that if I still had held that view, or someone who holds that view, that would actually result in the resolution that at that time I thought it would.
Yeah.
Right? That I would think, well, that would get rid of all this stuff.
Yep.
I just don't think that is true.
Yeah.
I think I would still say, obviously, God has created us with things that we're good at,
Yep.
skilled at, talented at, gifted at.
Yep.
And when you do those things in any sort of community, whether you're talking about friendships, church,
Yep.
you know, sports, or a marriage relationship,
Yep.
The relationship can work better.
Yep.
Right? If you do what you're good at and they do
Yeah.
what they're good at and you work together at it,
Yep.
then that's going to happen. But to have defined roles where it's like you can only do that because you're a certain gender, it probably leads to trouble, right?
I think
And that has changed in me. That is something I'm just saying here that I've changed my thinking on that.
Yeah, I think a simplified example just to add to would be, again, the term I grew up around, tomboy. Somebody who really a girl who likes more boy type things. Tomboy, totally. That was a very common thing. I don't feel like that language. I feel like that language has gone away, and instead, I feel like culturally, again, anecdotally, not every case, that has been often replaced of, oh, like, is there an association there with being a boy? And so there's just a difference there. I feel like culturally, and again, I am limited to my own perspective, but yeah.
So I really appreciate this question, and I really appreciate whoever asked it pondering these things. And it seems from this question trying to understand something with an open heart that they don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my response to it would be, first, that I don't think we can say that the cause of anything is within a people group is there's one root cause.
Totally.
Yeah, that's good.
There was a time in the church where when the homosexual movement started to really take prominence and be noticed, that I can remember in the church being told, you know, that if you're gay, it's because you didn't have a good relationship with your father.
Totally.
And there's a longing there. And there was this attempt to paint with a single brushstroke an entire group of people, some truth that may be true of some of them.
Yep.
I can't speak. So I don't know. I've pondered this as I've sat and pondered this and as I've read and studied and tried to understand. I always come to the place where the core that I have to come to is anyone who is transgender is wrestling with something that I don't understand.
Yep.
There is a level of it that I can't comprehend, and that the only one who understands fully would be Christ. And so while I can think maybe there's something there about that, and I think there could very well be some validity to what this person has asked in some cases.
Yep.
I would hesitate to say it is in all cases, because I just don't think that there's ever simple answers, period.
Yeah.
And I think that when we're talking about a large group of people, to say, now I'm going to use an analogy, and if this analogy offends you, please forgive me, because I'm not saying that transgenderism is a cancer, but it's the only thing I can think of in my brain. So I'm not equating these two in any other than to say there are people who say that there's only one cause of cancer. But if you have ever known someone who has gone through cancer and you find out more information about cancer, there are a lot of different sources that can cause someone to end up being someone who is a cancer patient.
Yep.
But the uninformed might think the only way that somebody gets cancer is if they smoke. That's not necessarily true.
Totally.
In the same way, and again, I'm just using the analogy to think cause and effect. That's all I'm using it for. In the same way, we can look at a people group, transgender, we can look at a people group, homosexual, we can look at a people group, anything else, and we can say there's one root cause for that I've decided this is the root cause for because it makes sense in my brain. Edmonton
Oilers sports fans, I'd like to know why.
There's some deep inner healing that needs to take place there. That we can. I'm always hesitant to say there's one cause. The older I get, the more I realize people are far more complex than that. I think that if you take two people and you put them in exactly the same situation, they will respond, and the consequences of that situation will be incredibly different. So how can we take any people group that represents tens of or hundreds or millions, tens of or hundreds of thousands or millions of people and say there's one cause for that people group? I think about, I have two daughters, and I have one daughter who's older who never questioned ever whether or not as a girl she could do something. My oldest daughter, that was never an issue. She was like, I can do whatever I want. And she approached life with just a kind of like a brazen attitude like that. Like, I want to go do this thing, I will go do it. It never crossed her mind that I'm female, so I can't. My younger daughter, Leah, I'm constantly encouraging her that she can do whatever she wants and I try to expose her to things. Recently, I was showing her women's hockey and she said, girls can play hockey. And this is, and it's not that she's ever had someone say to her, girls can't, but for her, there is this something in the makeup of who she is that this has become an issue. So when we just look at that little example of two people growing up in the same house, that's a minuscule thing. And you go, for Megan, there was never an issue of whether or not me having certain body parts or not having certain body parts qualified me to be able to do something. Whereas for Leah, there's always been this question, can I do that because I'm a girl? If someone as a child of either gender thought, I like these things that aren't typically my gender, and that was something that was inside of them, maybe that could lead to this question later in life of maybe I'm not who I was, maybe who I am is not what my body, doesn't line up with my body, which is the core of the transgender desire, is to have my body and to become aligned in who I really am and who I feel I am. So I've been very intentional with Leah to say to her, like, you can like that, you can do that, you can do anything you want. But I just think that it's okay. I think we should try to understand people. And I think the heart of this person asking this question is that they want to understand transgender people better. But I think at the core, we need to realize when we start trying to paint with a single brush a large group of people, that becomes problematic because it's never one source. When we start trying to, and when we start thinking we figured out something that we can't fully understand, we got to be careful there as well. Like, at the end of the day, whenever I think about this, whenever I read about this, I'm always humbled by the fact that there is a certain level that I will never understand because I'll have never walked through that experience.
Let me do some live recanting or clarifying. I don't think by any means this has been the cause of somebody struggling with gender dysphoria. I don't think that's the case. I think this language of cultural association with gender roles and all that, as well as now gender identity being language we didn't have 20 years ago, has allowed somebody who felt like I knew personally people who, again, at the time they would have called them tomboys. And they really struggled with that, of not being feminine enough. This is now a new set of language that we have that for some maybe is helping them that we didn't have the language before, to all of a sudden have the language to be able to put together and even ways to then live to affirm those things, where for some it was a lifetime identity struggle. Others who had this struggle then no, I can do anything. Like I think those two examples you use of your two girls is great. I can do anything, doesn't matter who I am. Sometimes I feel like this language then has potentially become a new avenue they may not have gone down before.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just saying, I think gender roles are playing a part, and our language around them with gender identity on top of it has a new, for lack of a better term, outlet towards it that has come culturally as a result of our shifting language and the landscape there. Not at all the cause of gender dysphoria, but a new outlet to process it.
And I don't think that gender roles ever disappeared.
No.
I think when you were in school, and so I was a little older. I'm 20 years older than you. So when you were in school, I was done school. But I remember that message being out there, and I remember being a youth pastor and encouraging kids in that, because I do genuinely believe that. That was an attempt to try to make the gender roles not be so constrictive.
So rigid,
because the reality is there are gender commonalities.
Sure.
Not everyone fits into those commonalities, but the reality is, if you took 100 women and 100 men, there will be a lot of commonalities between them that will be different from the two test groups. That doesn't mean everybody in each test group fits into that model, but it just means that there will be commonalities there. And I think that there has been this attempt to break some of those down, or maybe not break them down, because I don't think people want to break them down. I think what people want, and I think even most feminists, what they want is for them not to be so rigid. That those who would say, I don't fit in this role that is traditional or that is common, but I don't have the opportunity to pursue who I am. And I think that's a good thing. But I think those commonalities will always exist because there are those commonalities. And I think the danger always is that we become restrictive, and then we identify people by whether or not they fit into those things.
Totally. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's...
Sorry, if I can just...
Yeah.
One thing I think is ironic is that I'll say the conservatives, on the one hand, fight against a certain group of conservatives fight against egalitarianism and want to be complementarianism. And so complementarian is that God created men and women. He created them different, and they complement each other, but they're very distinct and different roles. And so you need to fall into those roles. There's a certain subsect of conservatism that says you have to fall into these roles because this is what a man is and this is what a woman is. But then when someone says they're transgendered, they're like, no, that's just biological. You can't redefine who you are because your body says that. And they don't see the contradiction in their own argument.
Now, to add to that, I was just reading Preston Sprinkle's Embodied book. There was a country in the Middle East that's very Muslim, and there were a lot of gender identity surgeries taking place there because it was better and more understandable for them to be trans than to be gay. And so to transition to another gender so that they could be in a same-sex relation or an opposite-sex relationship was totally okay, which was really interesting because Islam is very conservative typically. So just to play off that conversation,
But it's interesting. It's funny when I when I sit and I try to think. I try regularly to think, and you look at what people are saying and weigh out the logic of their argument, and how oftentimes one part of their argument contradicts another part of their argument, and they don't even see it. That you're a woman because you were born that way, and that's it. So you can't be transgender. But also, if you're a woman, you have to fit into this role. So either it's just your body, and those are just body parts, or you have to fill in this It's interesting to me. It's an interesting tension, but we don't often think through the logic and the consequences of different points of view that we have and whether they're a cohesive unit.
Well, and I think everybody's aware, and this might lead into the next question a little bit, but that's I think the hardship in all of that is if you want to follow Christ, right? And I've heard this many times, then like what are the rules? Like what do I have to do to fit into whatever formula we're going to use that a good Christian does A, B, and C.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I fit into A, but does B work? What's C, right? And that's why we're always curious about, especially in the Christian faith, what are the rules, right? And we have tried really hard, I think, on this podcast to say, like, Christ is the rule. Like, loving people is the rule.
Yes.
But that gets foggy because I want to know more specifics than that, right? So,
But like, I think oftentimes like the lawyer who said, you know, okay, so what's the greatest rule? Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, who's my neighbor? We want the rules so we can know exactly what to do because love is a high bar.
Yeah.
Love is hard.
right.
And we want to know where we don't have to love. But to love everybody all the time that's a hard rule. But whenever you make it a rule, you've moved from grace to law, and we lose sight of that.
All right. Well, our next question says this. At Living Springs, do you feel it would be a safe place for a trans person to come in the building on Sundays? Not if everyone is affirming, just if it would be a safe place for those to enter and feel accepted and like it is okay for them to occupy the same space as cisgendered people. What steps do you feel could be taken to ensure the space is at minimum safe for a trans person to explore their faith if they would like to do so?
I would really hope that it would be. I believe that it would be. And I believe that we've shown that it is. And I would really hope that it would be. And that everyone would know they are loved and they are accepted. And whether you're trans or whether you're cis, whatever you are, we come to church to work on our faith and all of us to grow and to be led into truth by the Spirit of God. That's the goal of why we're coming to church. So we're all coming together. I've talked many times since COVID hit about church should be a gym. And a good gym should accept all people who want to come and get fit together to come and to work out. It should not be that, you know, if you go to a certain gym and you're slightly overweight or whatever, you get out of breath. Maybe you're not overweight, but you get on the treadmill and you're out of breath in 30 seconds. If other people in the gym are looking at you like you're a terrible human being, they've missed the point of what the gym is. And I think the church has oftentimes missed the point of what the church is. We are all people who are working on our faith journey.
Just for clarification, in case any of the audience or Blake,
Blake does not know what cis is. Please help me out.
Cis is when your biological, like your birth gender, biologically aligns with your felt identity. So we would all be cis males. Like we feel as a male and we're born biologically.
Is that initials?
I'm not sure if there's initials, but cisgendered would be.
I don't believe it's initials. I've heard different conversations about where it come from, and some people say that it was originally a derogatory term, and some people say that it's not. I don't think that's something to get offended.
I'd never heard it before,
offended by.
I think we've had a number of people who have felt space here. Again, you're right that not everyone in the building would be affirming, and so not everybody's in the same spot of the journey. I hope we would be able to be looking and attentive to create space. We would absolutely make space and protection, and even try to have conversations that would create that space for somebody, while we're still also learning ourselves and understanding. So there's absolutely space for, I think, anybody to come. And I hope feel safe.
I always think of on some podcasts, and maybe more than that, but I remember, Doug, you saying that we only affirm Jesus. Everybody else we accommodate.
Yes.
And I think, you know, as maybe silly or harsh or even good as that sounds, I think that is true. And I think that's what we try to do. Whether it would be a trans person or whether it would be someone with a different theology or whether it would be someone from a different ethnic background, whatever it is, I hope that our church accommodates, that we would be able to go, okay, we're here for the same reason, to get fit, you know, or to get, you know, close to Jesus. We say that our church is a sanctuary for people to come and experience God. And I think we have tried very hard to do that. And I think we have enough people that have come from different spaces and places in this world to our church now that I think we're getting a track record of being an accommodating church. I think we try hard to love people that walk in our doors.
Yeah, I think that the church has lost that message of the only thing I affirm is Christ. And I think that there's devastating consequences to that. I think we have lost sight of the fact that we all need accommodation. The core message of the gospel is that God accommodated us.
Yeah.
That is what the gospel is. That Christ Christ came to earth. Kyle, you and I were talking a couple days ago about that song, Christ is Lower Still.
Yeah.
And I would encourage
that one.
anyone to go. I've been listening to it a lot lately. I would encourage anyone to go on YouTube or to go on Spotify or Apple Music, find Christ is Lower Still by Matt Maher and some other people. I don't remember who, but I love Matt Maher. Shout out Matt Maher. And listen to that. And there's one, if you go to YouTube, there's one that the thumbnail picture is a picture of a statue of Christ underwater. I'm not going to say any more than that.
That's the one to watch.
Go to that and you will understand that. But Christ descended to come underneath us so we could ascend. That is the core of the gospel. So when Paul says things like, I only boast in the cross, when Paul says things like the gospel is offensive, this is the offensiveness of the gospel. The offensiveness of the gospel is that there is no one righteous, no, not one. And so no one should get affirmed but Jesus. But the church has lost that, and we've become, in many ways, self-righteous, and we're pretty good because I'm not as bad as I used to be, so I can affirm me, but I can't affirm the other person. And then that becomes so offensive. If we're going to offend people, we need to offend them with the message of the gospel, which is we are all in need of accommodation. And it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter anything about you. If you want affirmation, the church shouldn't be the I mean, you should get affirmation in that you're perfectly loved by God. You should get affirmation that, God created you, or created in the image of God, that you have inherent worth, that you have inherent value because of who you are. Those things should be affirmed. But the reality that this message is that some of us are just really, really good is counter to what the gospel is, and counter to, I think, the work that the Holy Spirit wants to do in all our lives. Amen. Because if we look at Jesus as the predominant example of who our model is, I think that we can also look at Paul as our example of what a follower of Christ should be. And the further Paul gets along in his life, the less he thinks of himself, the more he is aware of his sinfulness. And the deeper we go into grace, the more we should realize how much of a sinner we are. And when we are not moving in that way, we need to stop and evaluate who is leading us, because I wonder whether or not it's the Spirit of God that would constantly be trying to lead us into truth, and the truth is we are all sinners. I've been off a couple weeks, so I'm getting very preachy.
I like it. All right. We can move on to the next question. What is this? The third one we've done now? We're almost out of time already. Well, we only got two last week.
We only did two last week.
Oh,
You only did two last week?
yeah. We were long-winded. All right.
Did you? I'm just looking at what the question.
The one on Romans and the Million March for Children.
Yeah.
The one on Romans could take a long time.
It did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Kyle got really sidetracked on that one.
Oh, dude,
I think I got
I'm
really.
just
I
teasing.
think I got the verses, but all right.
there's so
before we
much
get
in
going.
that. There's so much in that.
There is.
All right. This question says, wondering what your thoughts of marriage being a Judeo-Christian practice and the concept of marriage becoming a legal thing once Constantine had made Christianity the state religion, and marriage becoming something that you had to register for and the state had to have record of. I'm asking this because there's a lot of scripture that references our marriage to Christ as the bride of Christ, and I have grown up believing that marriage is a glimpse into our relationship with Christ and how close we can be with Christ. Side note, I feel like I should clarify this closeness not meaning sexual.
Can I, before we get into that, can I just say, I think it's hilarious that you said marriage being a judo Christian practice. I think if you got a lot of judo in your marriage, there's probably a problem.
Blake said it because I believe it's written Judeo.
It is.
Oh,
But
did I say? Oh,
he
yeah,
said
sorry.
judo
I was
Christian.
just clarifying. The person did send in their question that way. Yeah,
He did. But just the way you said it came out judo Christian practice. And I'm like,
I
wow.
apologize.
All right, this is how we resolve conflict in our marriage. Karate chop.
Sometimes I've read the questions before. This one I had not, so
There you go.
I was reading that wrong. But
That's okay. It was
My
awesome.
fault. Judo Christian marriage. Well, interesting.
For some people, it is.
Judeo.
Yes. What's interesting is that when so there's a lot of layers. I don't know if we're going to get through this question. When Constantine made Christianity a state religion, and people had to start being registered for marriage.
Is that for sure the first time that's happened?
I have no idea.
I believe so.
Okay.
I believe so. At some point in history, the government, and I believe that's when, started saying we want to keep records of who people are. And, you think about the government's been doing that now. You can go get your family tree, and all that's because of government records. And Christians actually resisted because marriage was supposed to be this spiritual union.
For sure. Yeah.
So there is some truth there. So, and so I think that marriage in the New Testament does equate, and Paul uses it as a metaphor for our relationship with Christ. We are the bride of Christ, and Paul, even if you look in Ephesians 5, where Paul has that passage, wives, submit to your husband. Well, it actually begins, submit yourselves one to another, wives to your husbands. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Like, if you read through that whole thing, people don't often read through from there to the rest of the chapter. Because what's interesting is at some point, and you don't know exactly when it happens, Paul changes what he's talking about. And you think he's still talking about marriage, and then he gets to the end and he's like, I'm not talking about marriage, I'm talking about Christ and the church. Right? And he believes that marriage is this this metaphor or this picture that helps us understand Christ and the church. So absolutely, what you're saying is that. Now that's not talking individually. I'm married to Christ, you're married to Christ. But collectively, we are the bride of Christ, the single bride of Christ. And so for sure, the New Testament does paint that picture. When you look at the church, that is one of the biggest, most common metaphors that are used.
Well, and we've referenced the Bema podcast on here a lot. I was just listening to one a couple of weeks ago. The guy who leads that, Marty Solomon, talks about like Jewish tradition a lot, and he says it even would go right back to Exodus, like that we would see that in God making His covenant with the people at Mount Sinai. That rather than those stone tablets being 10 laws, you have to do this to get into heaven. It's basically, he's saying in Jewish tradition that would be a covenant. I promise to do this for you because I'm entering into a marriage with you.
Yes. And I would say go to Bema Podcast Season 1. There's an episode called Under the Chuppah, I believe it is, where he talks about the ancient Near Eastern way they did weddings, and he relates it to Exodus and Israelites at Mount Sinai. But as you read that, you see a lot of the words that Jesus used that we would never think of in the context of a marriage that Jesus is speaking to people who would have seen them in a marriage type understanding.
So really, we could go back much further than Constantine then in saying marriage was a legal contract and binding thing. And even Moses has laws already at that point. If you needed a certificate of divorce, which means you needed something legally to break the marriage because it had then been a legal covenant up front. So I don't know how far back you want to go on that. And I guess, I don't know.
I think Constantine is where the government started keeping records.
Okay.
Somewhere and maybe it's not Constantine, but I don't know that Moses had people submitting forms like we do at Airdrie registries when we get married.
Right.
Right.
I think then the concept of marriage. Let's go. Let's play. I'll be really cheeky. So let's go back to Adam and Eve. They get married. They're together. Either one, we've got the first couple committing sin and having sex outside of marriage because they didn't have anybody there to officially register it, or The commitment to one another and before God was what was required.
How do you know that God didn't marry them?
Well, God might have, but there's no official thing outside of that to have. Like, just baking.
God could have officiated their wedding.
That's true. He could have stood in
You're
the, stood in the
scaring
garden.
me. You're scaring me already. Every time you talk about Genesis. Because I'm thinking what I just heard you say is, oh, well, as long as I submit to you, you submit to me, we're in front of God, let's go for it.
No, and I think past that, I'm just being cheeky to start, but then past that, before you've got the legal commitment, so let's now move up to Moses' day, where the recognition of need of a certificate of divorce was something because culturally we have seen those two people made a commitment to one another. It was a witness before God, for sure, but there was also something a part of the community because I believe marriage is something important to the wider community.
Yeah.
Right, and fundamental to society. And I think because of that, there's a lot that comes with it. And so there's a whole conversation to be had about the legality of marriage, but I think the reason why then Paul uses that as an analogy is rooted, yes, in the value of marriage for the society, but also looking at the closeness that because of what it contributes and how much you depend your life on somebody else, because of the commitment you made, whether it's a formal, illegal, or Constantine recognized one or not, is one that is so formative and so close, it is not reached by any other level of relationship within society. And so Paul is trying to say, in a rabbinical sense, I would say, how much more will our closeness with Christ be? And the closest thing human relationship you can point to is us and Christ. I think he's also probably playing off the Old Testament stuff of God being married to Israel. But I think relationally, there's the closeness of, even more so than the closest relationship we can comprehend within humanity, God and the church, Jesus and the church will be even more wed, even using my language there, than that. I think there's almost two conversations of the heart of marriage and the legal part of marriage.
Yes. Yeah. So you said something that I wanted to respond to, but I can't remember what it was now. You said something, and I was like, oh, I have a thought, and now it's gone.
Sorry.
But no, that's okay. It was, what you were saying was, I wasn't going to disagree with you. Is there something I wanted to say that built on what you were saying that I just was like, no, I agree with what you're saying, but I just was going to rabbit trail somewhere to just go there. And I think that's why you see the devastation of divorce. Yeah. And that's why God, because marriage is so important. Yeah. And it's meant to be more than just, I know what I was going to say. Part of the reason why, when you said you're supposed to make that commitment in front of people, is the value of making a commitment in front of people. Yep. You can say something to someone without anybody else hearing, and then you can break that. Totally. There's meant to be this, I stand in front of other people. And even in the world today, when you get married, you don't need to get married in a church, but you need witnesses who sign that document. That if there's a breaking of that document, you can't say, well, I never really did, or I did it under duress. That there are witnesses on every marriage certificate. That's why, in Bible times, the weddings were a village coming together, and the celebration of that, but also the somber reminder of the covenant you were making to that person that is not supposed to be broken. And it's really easy to just, you could, because people go, well, based on what you're saying, I could go with my girlfriend and we could climb to the top of a mountain and have this wonderful moment, and I could say, I'm committed to you forever, and now we're married. But the problem with that is nobody saw you do that. And there's something about the saying it in front of witnesses that through all of history, culture has said this matters.
Which biblically, I'm playing off, I know Marty's covered this well too, so maybe this is fresh in your mind too. God made that commitment so deeply to us. The 10 Commandments are, though culturally and in movies and stuff we've seen, there's 5 on one and 5 on the other, not accurate. No. 10 on each of these 2 tablets, because it was the contract that a partner would have each had their own side to hold the other 2, and God says, here, have both.
It was like the carbon copy.
Yeah, you can hold me accountable to my commitment to you, and you therefore have both copies of this. That's how deeply committed God is to us, that he's given us the contract to hold him to his relationship.
And I think that's something beautiful that we're supposed to remember, is to, when we see a married couple who are fully committed to each other, and who have been that faithful, that example of faithfulness through a long time. Because it's wonderful when you see people who've been married 6 months and they're fully committed to each other, and it's like
Yeah, they're still having fun.
you haven't encountered any adversity yet. That's cute. It's adorable, but yeah, whatever. But when you think about the old married couples who still love each other well, who have modeled in their life a faithfulness that you go, that's an amazing thing. That's supposed to cause us to go, that is God's commitment to me.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
I think about marriage all the time. I assume you guys probably think the same way. Like, since I've got married, so marriage has taught me things. As I read my Bible and, understand the theology behind God loving us and stuff, I just always think couples that stand up and get married never know what they are stepping into.
Oh, no way.
They just do
Not at
not understand in any way what that commitment actually is, right?
If you knew, you'd never get married.
Well, it's true.
Same
Probably.
like kids.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. It's no different. If you knew what having kids was like, nobody'd ever have kids. Not that it's not great,
No.
but there's a cost.
Yeah.
And we don't think about that cost. And when we're young and in love, we can't fathom there being a cost.
But I think, again, probably why God uses marriage, so much to understand our relationship with Him. That's the way it's designed to be. We grow and we learn, right? When you enter into a relationship with Christ, whatever understanding you have is amazing. And then you get whatever is left of your life to live that out and go, oh, I didn't know it was like this, right? I didn't know that God had that much grace for me. I didn't know, right? And hopefully in our marriages, that's the same way it grows.
Yeah, Melissa, who used to be on staff here, now in BC, she wrote a book for her master's, Sanctification in Real Life, Sanctification in the Everyday. I remember reading it a number of years ago, and it was basically how God uses real life to work sanctification in us. And she was using it in the context of marriage and parenting. And I think there's so much there. Marriage is the opportunity to learn the words of Jesus, that if we will die, we will find life. That if we will love our wife, how do I say this right? If we will love Christ by loving our wife or husband right? Because ultimately we are supposed to give up our life for His name's sake. But if we selflessly love that person and give ourselves away, we find the life that we want, that we typically look for in self-fulfillment, that can only actually be found in self-denial.
Yeah. Just for reference, I had her title down as Couches, Cloth Diapers, and Craft Dinner.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's a good book.
Really enjoyed it.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. Well, we are out of time. So we look forward to answering more questions next week, and keep sending them in, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah. See you guys.
Have a good week.
This has been the Living Springs Q&A podcast. If you have a question you would like answered or would like to learn more, visit us at livingspringsairdrie.com. Thanks for tuning in.